Welcome back, everybody, to Touch Base, our company podcast. I'm Josh Haynes, the Director of Community Impact, and today we're going to continue our conversation on the core values with Dave Marcinkowski, one of our founding partners. Our conversation is going to center upon the acronym CANEI, Constant and Never-Ending Improvement. And to set this up, I want to read for you a quote from Ianla Van Zandt. She says, "Growth is a very profound experience. It can be beautiful and ugly, empowering and confining, thought-provoking and mind-boggling, pleasant and unpleasant, all at the same time. Yes, growing, improving oneself can be a difficult experience, but as she teaches us, it is always worth the journey." Here is part one of my conversation with Dave Marcinkowski on CANEI. Hope you enjoy. The first thing I wanted to do as we kind of talk about these podcasts and values and whatnot is, like I said, to get this context. And so Dave Marcinkowski, partner of Madeira and Quext and leader in a host of other community ways for Lubbock, Texas, and beyond. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history, and then give us a little bit of a taste of Madeira's journey, and even beyond that? I mean, really, whatever you want to say. Go for it.
So, if we go back to my professional career, I graduated from college, a small school up in Michigan, and I didn't have a plan, didn't have a clue. My plan was actually to become a professional caddy. And I had caddied from the time I was 11 until I was 22 when I got out of college. And my plan was to go to Florida and pick up a bag and caddy. And me and a buddy of mine actually got a bag, and we were going to move down to Florida together. And like a couple weeks before we're going to do that, my buddy calls me. I was like, my parents are like giving me a hard time. Like, you got a college education, you're going to be a caddy. We need you to go get a real job. And he bailed on me, and I didn't have a choice. What was I going to do? Was I going to go down there by myself, which at the time I'd never really been away from home except for college, which was a couple hours away, or was I going to go get a job like him? And so I chose the latter, and I went to work for a temporary agency. And the first place that they placed me was as a bookkeeper at a apartment ownership management company called Edward Rose and Sons.
Okay.
And I've been, for 3 years, I went from being bookkeeper to like senior bookkeeper to like head of the bookkeeping department. My last name wasn't Rose, so that was probably the furthest that I could go. And I chose to one day quit. We'll get into some other values, and I'll talk a little bit about some points in my life where I had some choices, and I had strong feelings to do something. And I'll say that's God working within me, and we'll talk about that at a later podcast. But I went into my office and went to my boss and quit. Did my 2 weeks notice. Didn't have a job. Didn't have anything really going on, and I really didn't have a choice of what I was going to do other than to go find another job. And there was a lady that I worked with who came to me and said she knows of a guy who may know of a guy who knows of a guy that may be hiring for a position in Chicago, but you got to know this property management software called Yardi that had just come out. And so we didn't have the internet back then. And I went to the library and started looking through newspaper articles. It was on the computer, but I ended up finding some articles on Yardi, learned some keywords, was able to get an interview, and that's a whole other story I'll get into at another time. It was the director of training. And so my job was initially to write all the manuals for Yardi. Wow. And so I had to learn that. Interesting story that it needs to be said. I actually failed a computer course in college. And I had to take a summer course in order to graduate on time. And so, the idea that 3 years later, at Ed Rose, we didn't use computers. It was all paper stuff. And so, like, my use of computers was like zero or none. I mean, I was a computer idiot. And so I figured it out. And, when we talk about CANEI today, I think that's something that's important for people to understand. It's saying, okay, I can let these experiences affect me in a way where I shut down, or I can let these experiences and look for the opportunities in those experiences. Okay,
so let me stop you there just for a moment, because you just mentioned the word. You just mentioned the acronym CANEI. Okay, people can go to our website and they can see this value that's out there. But give us a quick introduction to CANEI and how that has begun even early in your life
Well,
to
in
shape you.
my journey, we just talked about, okay, I go work for this company called Marquette Management, great company up in Chicago, amazing partners. Their 3 partners were Rick Harr, Bruno Bottarelli, and Nick Ryan, huge mentors for me in my life. Making that change to Chicago was extremely stressful for me. And so I walk into this environment, and they had as their company values the word CANEI. And so I'm sure like other people who are watching this right now, they thought CANEI was some Greek word, some mythology type thing, like I did. I mean, I literally had no idea that CANEI was an acronym.
Yeah.
And so for like the first 2 or 3 months, I'm walking around and the partners would bring it up in meetings and stuff like that, and I just nod and smile like I knew what the heck they were talking about. I had no idea. And then finally my boss sat down with me one day, and I kind of had the courage to go, hey, what is CANEI? Because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have smartphones.
Yeah.
I couldn't go Google it.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the time because I was trying to write manuals for technology that I had no idea about. So I'm like, what does this word mean? And she's like, well, it's an acronym, and it means constant and never-ending improvement. I'm like, huh. And I went kind of on my merry way. It kind of struck me. It's like, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And like I said, I had 3 amazing partners, very different people. And I found myself in situations over the next 6 to 12 months where I could ask them individually, what does CANEI mean to you? And Rick was probably the most influential person in my journey through my 20s and early 30s. And he and I sat down, and he kind of went into a deep dive into what CANEI meant. And I was like, and I had what I like to call delusional confidence, meaning like I didn't know what I was talking about, but I had the desire to like learn. And so I was asking a lot of questions. Like, well, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And Rick took his time, was very patient with me, and he kind of painted this picture for me. And I got really excited about that. In a lot of ways, it was so important for me in my journey because it created kind of my mindset at the time that I needed. And so like kind of sticking with that, I worked for Marquette for 9 years. I met my wife, about year 6 or so. She moved up to Chicago to be a pharmacist from Texas.
Okay.
We got married, had a child, and she wanted to move back to Texas. And so I got, again, a total blessing. Got connected with Charlie and Gary and another partner, Paul Stell, and came down here to kind of work in the fee management world with them. They had a number of small to medium-sized properties and some bigger ones in the Metroplex. We had about 4,000 units or so at the time.
Okay.
To do fee management, manage for other people.
Yeah.
And so I'd worked for a family-run organization for 3 years. I worked for a group, Marquette dealt with more institutional class core assets. And now I was going into more C-type properties with a bunch of different ownership groups.
Okay.
And that was challenging, to say the least. There were things when you're an institutional core asset that you can do that the money's there for because you have higher rents that you can't do at a C property with lower rents. You just don't have the money to do it.
Right.
And it forced, again, it was one of those opportunities like, okay, well, how are we going to do this? I brought a different perspective. But with limited resources, kind of had to like, again, kind of reinvent myself. We had to reinvent our company. And we did that for 3 or 4 years together. And it was extremely stressful, and we didn't have great owner partners. And this is where other values come into play.
Okay.
So like you can't look at CANEI by itself. You have to look at it in the context of community and Christ. And again, we're going to talk about those 2 other values. But we were forced to have to endure things and deal with things, sometimes even almost give the perception that we were okay with things that really didn't fit our values. Values your core values are your foundational principles that help you kind of drive the ship and tell you where you're going to go. They're those like beacons of light that you kind of like always look to, the North Star whenever you need to look at your North Star.
Now, I like the way you said that because I think when we start talking values in our culture today, when you look around, you see vision statements, mission statements, people have them plastered on their walls or on their websites, this, that, whatever else, and yet at times, and I don't want to be cynical about it, but sometimes it just feels hollow. It doesn't feel like it's really a driver. And so for you, if you could talk through how the values have become a driver for you, that this really is, like you're talking North Star, that type of thing that kind of keeps you pointed in the right direction, as opposed to, well, it's cute and it kind of rhymes, or it's all in the same letter or whatever. This is something that like strikes at your, when you say core values, ever since I've known you, I would say this strikes literally at your core. So talk about how it's more than just...
Yeah. So one thing I think it's important to know for a foundation in the conversation around values is I believe very strongly, and when I speak for me, I feel like I'm speaking for my other partners.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that some more too as we kind of move along. And I think in future podcasts, it's going to be great because I think we're going to bring them in and have some real heartfelt conversations around this. But like we're all living in this wonderful world, and we're kind of writing our own story. We're on this journey. So my view of values back in '96 when I heard the word CANEI for the first time, to where I am today is 110,000% different. Mm-hmm. And it's just because you have these life experiences along the way that kind of help galvanize, okay, what does that really mean to you?
Yeah.
And is it fair for me to look at you and say, CANEI means to me what it means, it should mean to you what it means to me. And that's not what we're trying to say at all. What we're trying to say is from a leadership perspective, from a strategy, from a vision, from a values perspective, these are the things that mean the most to us. And so it tends to resonate more with me than some because I've been looking at these for a very long time.
Yeah.
And so as it relates to CANEI, constant never-ending improvement, what does that mean? Well, I like to say it means progress, not perfection. Never-ending, meaning that we're always looking for an opportunity to be better today than we were yesterday. So that means that we're dealing with something that I'll call it a mindset. You have to be okay with the fact that perfection doesn't exist. Perfection may exist in a policy or a procedure that we don't need to be tinkering with, but life is changing so fast. What worked 5 years ago may not work because something's changed in the environment that has to force us at that point in time to go, okay, wait a minute. We love this policy procedure. We love how we used to do things then. Now things have changed. We can't lean back into how we used to do it. Now we got to look at it again and go, okay, there's something here we need to see if we can be better at because it's going to make us better as an organization.
Well, and I think, and speak to this for a moment, like we're just talking here. Speak to this for a moment because ever since I've known you, and it's not been too long, but I've known you for a year and a half or whatever in these conversations. Every time I talk to you about that change, that improvement piece, you don't seem afraid of that. Right. That almost excites you. And in a culture that seems in a lot of ways driven by fear, what is it that's moving in you that excites you about the change and the improvement piece?
I don't want to be cliche here, but I mean, it's looking at life as opportunities. I like to say doors that are open. So as we go in, as I get up in the morning, I go to work, I'm driving, all of a sudden doors will start opening. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. Am I supposed to do something with that? Like a lot of people will be like, whoa, I want to stay in my lane. I feel good about my lane. I don't want to go through that door because that door is kind of scary. I don't know what, the fear of the unknown. I don't know what's over there on that side. Yeah. So I just want to stay in my lane, leave me alone. I'm going to do my thing. And that's okay. I mean, it may not work in our culture to where you're able to move through our organization because we're as an organization looking for opportunities and we're looking for doors to jump through and we're taking advantage of those. Yeah. And so that's kind of how I view this is looking for opportunities and taking advantage of those.
Well, and not to, you've already introduced, we're going to talk through Christ and community and those types of things kind of coming forward in future podcasts, but to throw that in there just a little bit, I mean, you are a man of God, claiming Jesus Christ, and so give me just a quick snippet of how Jesus gives you a little fearlessness to go through this stuff.
Well, and we all have our own relationships with, those who are believers. And here's the deal. You don't have to be a Christian to work for Madeira or any of our other companies. This isn't about what religious belief that you have. But we all have, I would say, relationships with a higher power or just like a mental intuition that we lean into. Mm-hmm. I feel like I have a personal journey with God. And there are times where I'm like, dude, what are you, I don't want to go over there. That's a mess. And yet I can feel myself being pulled in that direction. And it's the having the courage to say, okay, I'm willing to try this. Yeah. And the funny thing is I could tell story after story after story of how that's been successful. Most of them, it's not like that door was the important door. It was the door 3 behind it that you never would have seen if you didn't go through that first door. Oh. And so I challenge people, again, you don't have to believe in God to work for Madeira. And when we get to the Christ core value, we're going to get into that in depth and have people understand that. But for our partners, it's important. And where we're trying to drive the overall ships that we have together, I think it's important for our teammates to look and go, okay, that's really important to them. And they wear that on their sleeve. That's who they are. And I appreciate that about them.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things you've done, and I want to point this out because I want whether you are a fellow team member with us, or whether you are an investor or beyond, whoever else may see this in the future. I appreciate how you've given us, any of us, like there's some easy on ramps here for us to kind of join you in this journey and feel like we're actually all moving in the same place.
Yeah.
And a couple of those is one is that improvement. You've already shown us at least a little bit of a feel in how you've grown. And it seems like we live in a culture today that's afraid to like talk about how we messed up in the past. And yet that's endearing. Like it's authentic. It's a sincerity piece that kind of comes through and says, hey, this is, like I didn't know these things and now I've learned some things, and because of it, I'm better because of that. And when you create a space, I like to use this phrase every now and then. For those who don't know me, I'm a former pastor. Like you create spaces for grace, then people can kind of join you in that fearlessness and saying like, I can risk in good ways based upon these values that we're talking about that are helpful to others, because I know it's okay to risk here. It's a good place to do that. Thank you so much for having joined us. That was part 1 of my conversation with Dave M. as we discussed constant improvement. Part 2 will be available to you shortly. Remember that growth is always worth it, and so is the journey. Have a good day. Thank you.